Hello. Hi, Nellie. Hi, Roz. Hello, Jeff. So here we are, more of the Mandukya Upanishad with a discussion from our friend Swami Rama. Entitled the book Enlightenment Without God. It's discussion on the 12 verses of Mandukya Upanishad, which is, of course, all about Om Mantra. And just to briefly orient us on what this third verse of the three is about, here's briefly the first two verses without the discussion. Hari Om, the entire universe is the syllable Om. Hi, Ben. The following is the exposition of Om. Everything in the past, present, and future is verily Om. That which is beyond time, space, on causation is also Om. It's pretty big, isn't it? And verse 2, all this whatsoever is seen here, there, and everywhere. Hi, Indika. Hello, Berto. Oh, Berto. Hi. All this whatsoever is seen here, there, and everywhere is Brahman. This very self, Atman, is Brahman, the absolute reality. And this Atman has four aspects, and then the verses go into those four aspects one at a time. And so here we are at verse 3. The first aspect is the waking state, Vaishvanara. In this state, consciousness is turned to the external. Looking for something. Oh, sorry. Let me do this again because I want to make a point here, but read it first. The first aspect is the waking state, Vaishvanara. In this state, consciousness is turned to the external. With its 7 instruments and 19 channels, it experiences the gross phenomenal world. Here we see, if we look at this, if we pause closely, we can see the challenge of finding English words and sentence structure to convey this. It's just extremely difficult. In the actual Sanskrit, I'm no Sanskrit scholar, but in the Sanskrit, I'll show you this. Just look here. The first word where my finger is pointing, there's the word Jagrat. That's the word for waking. And way down here, where I'm looking now, at the second line, this is where is the word Vaishvanara. It's hard to see. You don't need to see it exactly. But I'm trying to say that to point out that in the sentence structure of the translation, the first aspect is the waking state, comma, Vaishvanara. But note that the actual word that translates as waking is Jagrat. And it's the first word of the verse. When we put the English translation, we say waking, comma, Vaishvanara. But the Vaishvanara comes later in the Sanskrit. Here's the difficulty. It is a plane of reality. Vaishvanara is the plane of reality. You and I are presently experiencing the plane of reality, the level of reality called Vaishvanara, etc. But the word Jagrat, the waking, the English word waking state, is what you and I are doing here in the plane of reality with its Vaishvanara. The next English translation that Swamiji used, in this state, consciousness is turned to the external. That's not just a little fluffy little sentence that we just read over. It is extremely, extremely important. Hello, Marydel. Hi, Hashim. Guten Abend. This is really the key principle. Remember, in the last verse, the second verse that we looked at, there was mention made that the consciousness turns outward through four. What was the word that was used? Through four. I'm looking here. Aspects, four aspects. So the Atman, the center of consciousness, the pure consciousness, operates outward through four aspects. One of the aspects or ways in which it operates is turning to the external. That may sound like, well, so what? That's kind of obvious. Well, when it turns to the external, this external, what you and I know as the world out here, this is the Vaishvanar, this is the external. And the experience that you and I have in this external is that of the waking state of consciousness. There is significance to this. And then it says, with its 7 instruments and 19 channels, it experiences the gross phenomenal world. And so this means that when you and I are in the waking state, the Atman is operating through instruments. Now, I'm just going to make this comment. We're going to read more about it when we look at what Swamiji says here. And in the coming verses, we will see that these instruments, such as the ego and the 10 indriyas, the cognitive senses, and the mind called manas, the ego called ahamkara, and the discrimination wisdom called buddhi, these operate in Vaishvanar. They operate in the next level of Tejasa. And then we will see in three more verses from now that these do not operate in that next level called Prajna, which you and I experience as deep sleep. So the consciousness moves outward. I hope that didn't just drive you crazy there. I just wanted to make that little preface comment there, that what this is about is that consciousness from its subtlest, deepest, purest level of being just naturally moves outward. And as it moves outward into this plane of reality out here that you and I know as a conscious mind and a breathing, mechanical breathing being and a physical body. And yet it is Atman. This Atman moves outward to what here the words are used, the external world. That's this. Consciousness in the waking state, parentheses, Vaishvanar, experiences the objects of the world. This is the state of consciousness that identifies itself with the physical and pranic sheaths. And so there is the breath, and it's the pranic sheath, and there's the physical. Its 7 instruments are the 5 elements, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, or space, the breath, and the ego, which identifies itself with the body. Because of the ego, I think that I am this me, and you think that you are this you. And we all know that. Its 19 channels are the 5 active senses, the karmendriyas, speaking, grasping, moving, reproducing, and excreting. The 5 cognitive senses, hearing, touching, seeing, tasting, and smelling. And the 5 pranas, prana, apana, samana, udana, and vyana. And sometimes those are called the 5 vayus. And the 4 antakaranas, or inner instruments, mind, ego, intellect, and chitta, which are manas, ahamkara, buddhi, and chitta. So you add those all up, and those are 19. I'll make a note here that if you look at Ishupanishad, and I think it's Mandukya Upanishad, some of the other Upanishads, you'll see these lists enumerated, and the lists are not exactly the same. Well, it's just the particular author at the time of that Upanishad just like many of us will just name off some characteristics of anything. And we don't always list exactly the same things. If we have a bowl of vegetable soup, and you say, what's in that vegetable soup? The cook will say, well, there's this and this, and they will list the vegetables that are in the soup. Next time you ask what's in the vegetable soup, it may not be exactly the same list of vegetables. This is just a playful way of saying it. But it's basically a bowl of vegetable soup. So I'm saying that to you just when you notice in different books, different lists of these inner instruments, don't let it get you thrown off, because one place somebody mentions 26 things. Here it talks about 19. Somewhere else it lists 18. And if you were to carefully look at those lists, you would see, wait a minute, they're saying essentially the same thing. So again, that's me suggesting to you, don't ever let that get you thrown off. There's all these inner instruments that are going on. In modern psychology, Swami Rama says, the dreaming and sleeping states are thought to be unconscious states. But Vedanta psychology explains that they are not actually unconscious for the yogis who can attain conscious access to the dreaming and sleeping states. So when you and I use the word unconscious, we don't have to throw out the word. The word unconscious is a perfectly useful word, as long as we remember that what we really mean by the use of the term is something along the lines of ordinarily unconscious or typically experienced as unconscious, something like that. But it's not necessarily totally unconscious. A simple example of that is when you're having a dream. Within the dream, it's not unconscious, it's fully conscious within the dream. There's people, there's places, there's activities going on, and within the definition of that dream, there's something really going on. And at the moment in the dream, it's not unconscious at all. But by comparison to this out here, which you and I would commonly call the conscious mind out here in this external gross world, by comparison, it is, relatively speaking, unconscious. So there's nothing wrong with calling it unconscious. Vedanta psychology explains that they are not actually unconscious for the yogis who can attain conscious access to the dreaming and sleeping states. This is one of the points of confusion. Later in this text, he'll mention Yoga Nidra. This is one of the most confusing things about the term Yoga Nidra and the practice of Yoga Nidra. In our modern world, Yoga Nidra has come to be known as virtually any form of relaxation. Listening to music can be called Yoga Nidra. There's all sorts of guided imageries that people are publishing in books and recordings and calling it Yoga Nidra, with no mention, no awareness whatsoever that Yoga Nidra really has to do with being conscious of the normally unconscious level of deep sleep. That's what Yoga Nidra is. It's aware of that level of our consciousness. We talked about the 4 levels here that the Atman operates in. We're trying to be aware of them all. Waking is that state of mind in which one remains aware of one's activities in the external environment and of the objects of the world. The waking state is the state of subject-object consciousness. What does that mean? Because out here, I am the subject. This postcard here is the object. I am the subject. This book is the object. My little hat, which is sitting over here, is an object. And I am the experiencer of this hat. So I am the subject. That is the object. And so this plane of reality out here is one of subject-object relationships. There's a me, however we define that. There's a me, and there's all of this out here. All of these objects are out here in the world. And calling an object does not mean it's negative. So it does not mean that I'm merely objectifying people in my family, people I love, and they are just objects. It's not insulting at all. It's subject-object relationships. This is just what's going on. The mode of consciousness is dualistic in this plane called Vaishnava. One experiences oneself as subject and everything else as object. In waking consciousness, the ego, one of the modifications of mind, one of antakarana, experiences itself as the subject who is conscious. It appears to me, the me that is ego, it appears to me that I, the me, is conscious. It's not actually what's going on. The Atman itself, the pure consciousness itself, is operating outward through instrumentations, including the instrument of the ego. But the appearance is that the ego, as subject, in the duality of subject-object, it appears that the subject, called ego or ahamkara, is conscious. And this is part of why we all want to cultivate self-awareness, contemplation in daily life. Swami Rama used that term earlier on in our review through this. Or you can call it meditation in action. It doesn't matter if you call it constant contemplation or meditation in action. The principle is there. You and I want to pay attention to what's going on with this character called me. And how, not because there's a right or wrong way for me to act. It's not a moral issue of what's good and bad and all that kind of stuff. But there's a process going on whereby the subject is experiencing all the objects of the world. And that plane of reality is called Vaishnava, just to give it a name. Sometimes in English we can call it the gross plane of reality. And then is the subtle, and then is the causal, and the fourth is the absolute, or something like that. I'm going to read this again. This mode of consciousness is dualistic. It experiences oneself as subject and everything else as object. In waking consciousness, the ego, one of the modifications of mind, experiences itself as the subject who is conscious. How can the ego even experience itself? How can it experience itself? Well, because it's actually Atman operating outward through the ego, that the ego appears to be conscious. The mind experiences itself as the subject who is conscious. Thus, it is brought into self-definition and stands out as the figure, the subject figure, while objects remain as the ground or appear to be the ground. So there appears to be a me, an ego who is conscious. And this is where we miss the boat. We simply don't see that it is not the me ego that is itself conscious. It appears to be conscious because the actual consciousness, the Atman, the pure consciousness of Atman, is operating outward through an instrument called ego. So the ego appears to have consciousness. It's just appearances. My computer appears to be conscious. Your computer appears to be something in front of you. You've got me sitting there talking to you. There appears to be something going on. It's hard to remember that, in fact, what's in front of you is a bunch of matter. It's a bunch of protons, electrons, and neutrons, and atoms, and molecules that form together to form a computer, and there's electricity flowing through it. So because of all of that combination, there appears to be a Swami J on your screen. And we lose sight of the fact that what's really going on in front of you on your computer is a flow of electricity. We just overlook this. And so this may sound like a bunch of intellectualizing that we're doing with this, and that I'm adding on top of the intellectualizing that Swami Rama is doing and that the rishis are doing. But that's not the case. We're using language to attempt to talk about something that cannot be talked about. And then internally we get the ahas and say, wow, there's something to this. In waking consciousness, the ego, one of the modifications of the mind, experiences itself as the subject who is conscious. Thus, it is brought into self-definition. Thus, the ego, is brought into self-definition and stands out as the figure, while objects remain as the ground. The emergence of the ego as a small island upon which to stand is an important step in the evolution of self-consciousness. What does evolution mean? Simply means evolves outward, moves outward. Shakti manifests outward into form. Formless manifests outward into form. We all know this. We see this around us all the time. You ever watch a house get built? All those parts get delivered by the truck, and there's a pile of bricks, and a man stands there, with a bunch of concrete and bricks, and before you know it, you have a brick wall. You have a bunch of brick walls, you have a house, and then you put a roof, and you watch the magic of this thing being built. Look at all the ingredients that are in the kitchen, and a good chef goes into the kitchen, takes all this stuff, moves it around, rearranges it, heats this, cools this, solidifies this, liquefies this, spreads this around in this particular way, puts this in this container, puts that in that container, and we end up with lunch. And so we're just rearranging constantly. This is a beautiful thing. The emergence of the ego as a small island upon which to stand is an important step in the evolution of self-consciousness. The ego enables one to be conscious of oneself, but the self that one is conscious of is extremely circumscribed. It allows it to become an individual self, but that individual self is very, very small. Doesn't seem to be that way, but it is. One experiences a boundary around oneself. This comes with it developing as an ego. A split from the objects one experiences. So now suddenly there is a me and there is an all of this out here. A moment ago, that's not what there was. There was just oneness, pure, absolute, monistic, non-dualistic, one Shiva, one Shakti because of the potentiality, the Maya, the Avidya, all of that stuff. There is a manifestation out here. And from that, because we don't understand that, we end up saying, who is this God who created this? Well, it's the one reality that continually is constantly changing and changing and changing. One experiences a boundary around oneself, a split from the objects one experiences. Now that the split has occurred, now it's final, and now I'm absolutely convinced that there is a me, and over there is a Hashim, and over there is a Meridel, and over there's a Bertel, and over there's an Inika, and over there's a Ben, and you're all separate, and you're all over there, and I'm over here. It's a great game. We get to have a lot of fun living in this world of duality out here, but this is what has happened. And we want to gradually explore this within. Don't take my word for it. Don't take Swami Rama's word for it. Don't take the Rishi's word for it, who wrote these 12 verses. Explore it. Snoop around. Ponder about it. Don't just read these books that we're reading for intellectual information so you can memorize data and pass an exam on a college test. That's not what it's about. It's so that we can ponder this and explore in this inner laboratory. and snoop around in there and gradually discover this stuff for ourselves. Pretty neat, huh? One experiences a boundary around oneself, a split from the objects one experiences. This leads to a sense of separation or a feeling of alienation from others or from one's environment. So I feel alienation. My experience is of being an alien relative to all of you. I say, that's Hashim. He's over there. I don't know about Meridel and Bertel and Inika and all these people. I'm surrounded by duchies, no less. All of them. This is the way we experience. In the waking state of consciousness, one processes experiences in a way that psychoanalysts have termed secondary process functioning. I'm going to say some more about this because it's a neat concept. In the field of psychology and psychoanalysis, traditional psychiatry, psychoanalysis, coming from the early days, 100 years ago approximately, of Sigmund Freud, they talk about secondary process. So if there's secondary process, it's based on primary process. Now, this may sound like intellectual stuff, and it's not. It's a really, really neat piece of information for you and I to be aware of. Here's the principle in terms of our chart that we're familiar with. On here, there's 1, 2, 3 vertical dotted lines, right? And this vertical dotted line right here is a dividing line. So there's all of this out here, and there's this stuff back here. Okay? On this side of the divided line, this is what psychoanalysis calls primary process. And when that unconscious stuff moves from here outward into what you and I know as the conscious mind, this is called secondary process. Now, if a human being, if a person, you or I, starts during the day in our relationships and our family and work life and our community, if I start to experience too much of this primary process out here in the domain of this world, out here in the world of secondary process, if I'm experiencing too much of this coming forward, the psychoanalyst will say that I am being flooded. It's a common term, the English word they use, flooded, like a river flooding, or an ocean flooding the beaches when a hurricane comes or something like that. It's saying that the person is being flooded by their unconscious material. The unconscious in that way of thinking is supposed to stay back here in the realm of primary process. It's supposed to be filtered so that what comes out here into my conscious waking state mind is healthy mentally. And if I am getting flooded by my unconscious material, one of the key terminologies for that is psychosis. And then there's many different ways in which that psychosis may manifest. So I may be called a paranoid personality. I may be called schizophrenic. There are subtle differences in these various diagnoses. But the picture in this model of thinking where Swami Rama mentions here secondary process, the image of proper good mental health is that you have a nice boundary between primary and secondary process. You're supposed to have a wall. Where's a wall? There's a wall. You see, there's supposed to be a wall here. So that, you see what I did? I covered up the primary process so that I can be out here and I will be healthy. But if stuff is leaking through this wall here, there's holes in my wall, then my conscious mind, my secondary process is being flooded by my primary by my primary process. Primary process comes out into secondary process. I'm called mentally ill. And very commonly, I will be put on medications, pills, drugs to cause this wall to be thicker. So the solution is, let me block this off so that I will not be aware of my unconscious mind. Thank you very much. Because if I'm aware of my unconscious, I'm a crazy person and I'm psychotic and I have serious troubles. This is a very common phenomenon. I have met in my life quite a few people who have mental health diagnoses. Now, I say this cautiously because I'm not trying to say that there's no such thing as mental problems. If we're getting flooded by a lot of this stuff, it can cause serious problems in coping out here in the external world. But I have met a lot of people over many years who have experienced some of these so-called mental illnesses, and they're troublesome. I'm not saying that they're not, but some of these people have very good insight yogically, spiritually, whatever term you want to use. They have an intuition about the center of consciousness. They have an intuition about the nature of all of this stuff that we keep talking about, and they don't feel crazy. They know that something's wrong, and some have been put under medications for years, and yet they still want to study yoga and this stuff that we keep talking about. I've run into a... Huh?
Because Buddhi is still there.
Matri just hollered from the office because Buddhi is still there. There is Buddhi. There is some intelligence there. There's some wisdom there that says, no, underneath it all, I'm not crazy. And has an intuition, reads a book about Atman or pure consciousness or divinity in that kind of way, or Shakti, and says, wow, I think I'm divine. And there's an intuition that is accurate, it's back here. But a lot of the old habits, the samskars, is leaking forward and causing trouble out here, and it really, really is causing trouble. So many people like that. Anyway.
We need to stabilize the mind first.
And so we need to stabilize the mind. Very, very seldom, I think this is true. I know some people who are yogic-oriented people who are practicing psychologists and doctors and like this, who have some degree of understanding of what we're talking about and are actively, hi Octavia, slow connection. Well, there's nothing I can do about that, so I'm just going to keep going here. Some of the professionals that I have met have some degree of familiarity with what we're talking about and are actively attempting to teach their clients and patients this core principle. Get ready. Here it is. You've heard this before. It's called vairagya, non-attachment. How to gradually learn to be unaffected even by my hallucinations and my crazy thinking and all like that. I don't want to beat this dead horse too much here, but I wanted to pause and make this point for you. And because Swamiji here mentions secondary process, and I hope that my talking about that a little will help this little sentence make more sense. And this is why you have 12 verses of the Mandukya Upanishad attempting to outline levels of consciousness. And what's the old-fashioned, going back thousands of years, ways of understanding that? Then you sit around and you talk about it. Swami Rama has mentioned to us an elder Swami that he lived with in the caves of the high Himalayas named Niranji. And the young Swami Rama had trouble learning from his own teacher. It was too close. But he would sit with Niranji, and Niranji would explain these things. Niranji was an illiterate man, had no education, totally unlettered. But he understood this stuff because he had been around it his whole life, and he was old, and he had pondered this and contemplated and meditated, so he had an ability to explain it. And so this is the man that in Swami Rama's youth, according to Swami Rama, the young Swami Rama, would turn to and say, Niranji, would you explain this to me? And so this is the old way of learning this stuff, is you talk about it. And then talk about it, and Swami Rama talked about it, and then when we look at a book, all this is written talking. This is just Swami Rama talking to us in print.
I was thinking of
And I think this personally, I think this is a great way to read this kind of stuff. I have read many of these books that, okay, Swami Rama, what are you trying to tell me here? Swamiji, what are you saying now? As if he's written this book for me. Okay? What?
I was just, yesterday when we went through the Tripura Rahasya, I was thinking of Naranji, because how many times have we gone through the text, and just by hearing it over and over again, you're
Tripura Rahasya over and over.
It's not that you don't read it because it's amazing, but I've heard you talk about all these things so often that I have not read as much as people may think, but just because just constantly swimming.
We sit here and we're constantly talking about it. And so it comes out in a certain way in a certain conversation. We may not know exactly why. I don't know exactly why. And there's Phil Salvato. Hi, Phil. Boy, what a nice little cluster of yogis we have hanging out today. So this comes out of my mouth to you today in this conversation, and maybe there's something useful about it. Now, this is streaming out, and I'll save the video, and I'll post it on the YouTube for a while, but I can't post everything. And it's not that this is so profound that this particular discussion of verse 3 of Mandukya Upanishad, this one is so perfect that this one needs to be preserved forever. But it means that it can sit there and people can hang out and go through this stuff and listen again. That's all we can do. We keep talking about it and we have conversations. Some of the conversations are in writing in the form of a book. Some of the conversations are in this way, like this. Some were sitting with Naranji up in the mountains with a stick on the ground, drawing little pictures in the sand. There's different ways of communicating. And then we all must do this internally. Don't just sit there and take in what I'm saying and say, okay, that's it. I got it now because Swami Jay talked about it. And he's talking about what Swami Rama wrote here. And the great sages wrote the 12 verses of the Upanishads. Don't stop there. Please don't stop there. Allow it to just sink in, and later today or tomorrow or a week from now or a month from now or a year from now, allow this to go through your mind and ponder it. Lay on your favorite lazy couch. I'm coming to mind, I'm thinking of Phil Salvato, who is an artist, and I think Rosalind is here too. Rosalind is an artist. They both do beautiful, beautiful art. I don't know if Rosalind, if you've ever met Phil. He lives in Pittsburgh, and I've been in his studio up there, and I asked him to teach me how to paint a painting. He sells some of his paintings for like $5,000 or $10,000. I said, Phil, I want to make a $5,000 painting. Will you show me? And he just cut me off, said, no, you can't. And I'm saying that lovingly because he's absolutely right. Because I marvel at the skills that people that I meet have such tremendous skills in one area or another. One person's a fine artist with oil paint on canvas. Somebody else is a magician. Somebody else is able to explain computers to me in a way that I just absolutely am amazed by, and on and on and on. And so we each have different things. Anyway, primary and secondary process. That's what I wanted to divert on here. So Swami Rama says, in the waking state of consciousness, I'm repeating this sentence we already read. In the waking state of consciousness, one processes experiences in a way that psychoanalysts have termed secondary process functioning. Here, the vast majority of information coming from the external environment and from one's memory is filtered by the ego. Thus, much information may be ignored because of the ego's narrow focus on its own particular identification and preoccupations. Well, that narrow focus, my friends, is called mental health in the external world. That's called mental health. And if you're aware of the other going on, that's called mental illness, commonly referred to as psychosis and some other terminologies. If you are a yogi and we're on the path of self-realization, we want to figure out how to experience the primary process in such a way that we gradually learn vairagya, non-attachment, so that I am not affected by that. Now, why the hell would we want to do that? because the thing that we're looking for, the Atman, this question mark, is on the other side of the primary process. And there's just there's no leapfrogging over it. You can't do it that way because the pure consciousness manifested outward. Remember the first 3 verses we've been talking about. It manifested outward out here so I can be a person in a body, a breathing being with a conscious mind and an ego. It manifested outward through this. So the idea that somehow I, out here, am going to escape encountering this to experience this, it just doesn't work that way. We simply must be willing to sit for our meditation and gradually learn to allow the primary process to come forward so that we can cultivate being undisturbed, unaffected, and uninvolved by it. Good. You two said hi to each other. That's wonderful. You're both neat people. And I don't know, maybe you're both crazy too, each in your own beautiful way. But I love you both dearly, and I've been in your studios. Rosalind was in Buffalo at the time I was in her studio, Phil. And Phil is still in Pittsburgh. And I still remember, Phil, that beautiful, beautiful woman picture that you were drawing up there that somebody had commissioned you to do. That's one that always sticks out for me, and so many of them that were on the wall in your gallery there. Anyway, I don't want to get too far off into old memories that are all coming from back here, latent memories. Anyway, I'm going to put that down. And whoops, I'm turning the book back over and continue with what Swamiji has to say. Here, the vast majority of information coming from the external environment and from one's memory is filtered by the ego. Thus, much information may be ignored because of the ego's narrow focus on its own particular identification and preoccupations. Waking consciousness out here is further constricted by the framework of time, space, and causation. Remember, we're talking about Vaishnavar, this plane of reality out here. In this mode of consciousness, only a portion of one's potential is available to conscious experience and use. And coming to my mind to mention here that one of the reasons I was going to say I think this is true, but I absolutely am certain it's true, but I want to qualify it because I don't want to exclude other people from this. One of the things that happens with highly creative people, whether they are artists or musicians or mathematicians or computer geeks writing software code so that the rest of us can use these silly computers, these very, very intelligent people, is because they have some openings. They have some cracks between here and this deepest level of inner creativity and wisdom comes forward. And the finished product is an unbelievable piece of art form or music. Matri and Raj have gone together a few times to listen to Yanni. You may know the musician Yanni. And one time they were with him, sometime in the last year, they were with him in a sort of private sort of setting with a small group of people. And he was trying passionately to describe to the people where his music comes from. And he used the term, it comes out of the black. And all I'm doing is putting out here. And he said, the reason I'm being with you people here like this is because I want to try to help you understand where my music is coming from. And Matri and Raj spoke back to him. And I wasn't there. They said the words. And Yanni's daughter was there helping to run the show. And they said, he turned to his daughter, pointing at Matri and Raj, and said, just declaring out loud, they understand. These two understand what I'm talking about because they're meditators and that we hang out with this stuff. And so he refers to this back here as the black. He doesn't know Turiya, best we can figure yet. But it's so artists, any creativity, whatever form it is, whether it's fine art with canvas and oils, or it's music, or any of the other, something leaks through and it comes pouring out. If I ever say anything that sounds worthwhile, it's coming from that. Because this stuff is what I do. This is what has interested me my whole life, was consciousness. And it just took a few decades of practicing, not in an artist studio, but in a different kind of way. Waking consciousness is further constricted by the framework of time, space, and causation. In this mode of consciousness, only a portion of one's potential is available to conscious experience and use. But some of it leaks through, doesn't it? It is important to note that the waking reality alone does not help to unfold the human consciousness. This waking reality alone doesn't do it. When the reality of the dreaming state is understood thoroughly, one realizes that the dreaming state is more subtle than the waking state. Today, psychologists are trying to analyze and understand the dreaming state from a therapeutic viewpoint, meaning as if the waking state is the one that counts. This is the one where I am out here in the world and I have a mentally healthy ego structure and all like that. So from that standpoint, they're trying to analyze the dreaming, because the dreaming says something about me. But there the me is defined as the waking state person out here, me. And it's overlooking or ignoring or not aware of the Atman, etc. When one explores the dreaming state through direct experience by using a conscious method of meditation, one can understand the reality of the dreaming state in a comprehensive way. Very important. Notice how probably all of us and other people that you've met since you've been hanging out with meditation for a period of time, everybody at the beginning of meditation wants to say, oh, please help me, help me. How do I get rid of these thoughts? This monkey mind is driving me crazy. How do I get it to shut up? It's completely the wrong strategy. The strategy needs to be, how do I get this to come forward? How do I get to have all these thoughts come forward so that I can practice learning how to, borrowing Swami Rama's words, how I can learn how to be undisturbed, unaffected, and uninvolved with them. I don't close the door to it. I don't put a wall up between me and the unconscious. I want it to be there so I can be not affected by it, and so ultimately I can transcend it. When one experiences the dreaming state through direct experience by using a conscious method of meditation, one can understand the reality of the dreaming state in a comprehensive way. Comprehensive way means that this being called me or I is making sense of all this. Then this notion of that there's a manas and a chitta and an ahankara and a buddhi, and there's earth and water and fire and air and space, and there's cognitive senses and karmendriyas and all of this stuff going on inside, we realize, wait a minute, all of these collectively are instruments. My car has many, many instruments inside of it under the hood that I don't understand. My computer that I'm using here has many instruments inside of it that I don't understand. I just want to use the computer. I want to use the car. But if we want to find the source of me, I need to explore my own inner instrumentations. There's simply no escaping that. I can admire my car mechanic because he can fix my car. I can admire a computer person who understands this stuff. That's neat. Well, we want to understand the unconscious. One can understand the reality of the dreaming state in a comprehensive way. The dreaming state can expand the aspirant's field of knowledge. The dreaming state can expand the aspirant's field of knowledge if he knows how to witness the dream. Now we have a modern movement called lucid dreaming, as if somebody in fairly recent times had invented lucid dreaming. It's just a new terminology for something that the yogis have been saying for a very long time. And if we are doing lucid dreaming so I can find out what those dreams are doing with me, I have already fallen into the trap of thinking that I am this physical, body-based person out here, and those dreams are some other things that are somehow having an effect on me. We've missed the point. The dreaming state can expand the aspirant's field of knowledge if he knows how to witness the dream. At the same time, he can watch all the symbols, ideas, fancies, fantasies, impressions, memories, repressions, and suppressions coming from the storehouse of the unconscious mind. At the same time, he can watch all of that coming from the unconscious mind. Get ready for this. By understanding the dreaming reality and all of that we just read, by doing that, one can understand the waking reality also, because we are seeing then that this waking state reality has manifested out of that. And we have to explore within to understand that. Otherwise, it's just a philosophy. It's a nice philosophy, but we want to go beyond philosophy. We want to understand it. We want to be like Yanni, trying to say to the people, I want you to understand where my music is coming from, because that's what's awesome. Not merely listening to me come into a concert hall and entertain you with music. They said that's what he was saying. I want you to understand what's going on and where this music is coming from. By understanding the dreaming reality, one can understand the waking reality also. If one has not seen, heard, imagined, thought of, or read something, he cannot dream of it. Now, what is that saying there? That's introducing the third level down, the latent storage place, which we will come to. And because it's stored in the hard drive, and that comes forward into the dreams. It comes forward into the dreams, and then those can come forward out here into the conscious mind. So here we're talking about, to understand this, I need to understand this. But to understand that, we need to understand that that came from here. And that's the latent samskars, the deepest level of our false identities and attractions, aversions, and fears, and all of that kind of stuff. If one has not seen, heard, imagined, thought of, or read something, he cannot dream of it. In the waking state, one cannot go beyond the sphere of knowledge gained during waking. Listen to that carefully. There's something there. Hi, Johnny. In the waking state, what we're in right now, one cannot go beyond the sphere of knowledge gained during that waking state. If we want to go, if we understand more, we have to go beyond that. So, analyzing the dream state means understanding the waking state also. But by understanding the waking state alone, one cannot understand the dreaming state. So if I think that I am this waking state person and those dreams are just little things that are back there, and I'm going to do a therapy that's based on dream analysis, and I say to the therapist, says, well, so tell me about your dream, and we do this, and we say, well, what did that dream mean in relation to me? It's still focusing on that I am this me. This in psychology is called neurosis. This is not called psychosis, it's called neurosis. It means we are rigidly locked into the belief that this is me, and that's neurosis or neurotic behavior. And so because of the neurotic, we think that we can define ourselves in that sort of way. And then if I get too much of that other stuff, that becomes psychosis. So if I don't do that, then it just leaks forward, and it's dream analysis, so I can find out something more about my neurotic, egotistical me out here. And both of those are traps. The yogi says, as a starting point, Start by being aware that there is such a thing as consciousness. As was said in the first verse of we're only on verse 3 of the 12. Hari Om, the entire universe is the syllable Om. The following is the exposition of Om. Everything in the past, present, future is Om. That which is beyond time, space, and causation is Om. And then it said in that next piece, all this whatsoever is seen here, there, and everywhere is Brahman, infinite consciousness. This very self-Atman, individual pure consciousness, is Brahman, the absolute reality, and thus Atman has 4 aspects. We've just talked this time about one of those aspects. That's what we've just gone through. And this one aspect is called Vaishvanar. The name of it is called Vaishvanar. And what you and I are accustomed to doing or being familiar with in this plane of reality called Vaishvanar, what you and I are accustomed to doing is being in the state called Jagrat, or waking. This is called waking. So the next verse that we go to, we'll talk about dreaming. The one after that, we'll talk about deep sleep. The one after that, we'll talk about Turiya. So there's a sense to these 12 verses that go together. Okay, so thank you all for visiting. Hi, Johnny, and playing. I hope this is useful. And this is really, really neat stuff, isn't it? And you're all Atman. Whether you think of yourself as neurotic or psychotic or a mixture of both or somewhere in the middle, whether you think of yourself as very, very well-balanced and healthy and sane, or if you think of yourself as half crazy, it really doesn't matter, because underneath it all, you're Atman. Everybody's Atman. To be continued. Okay. Thank you for spending time together and hanging out and all that kind of stuff. Please have some wonderful contemplations on this stuff and some nice meditations from that. Okay. Bye-bye. In honor of the Dutchies, dooey. And remember, what we're looking for ultimately is to be found in the silence that is after the Om. And it's the true self that is always looking out through these levels and experiencing the world out there. Okay? Bye-bye. I'm going to push the button. Roseanne? Is Roseanne here? I'm going to push the button. How can I push the button? I don't have a Roseanne here telling me to push the button, but I'm going to do it anyway. Thank you for playing, Phil. It's nice to see you. Bye, Berto. Bye, Nellie. Om Tat Sat.